in government, but by the time it gets to the opposition whip, the debate has completely shifted from where it was at the beginning. And this also plays into the adjudicator's ability to credit teams in the debate. So if you are able to follow what we call the transition in a debate, you are in a better position to see which arguments were valuable at which stage of the debate, and if they're still as valuable as they were when the debate ends. And one of the debates that I enjoyed over the years that I've watched like several times is the 2009 World's Final. The motion was this house would ban abortion at all stages of pregnancy. So when that final started at the PM speech, when Victor spoke, he talked about the idea of maybe why abortion isn't a good thing and what kind of exceptions or exemptions we can give to women who find themselves pregnant. And when the opposition spoke, the debate shifted now to be about what right is more important, the right of the woman who would probably become a mother if she's allowed to carry the baby to full term, or the right of the fetus who doesn't in any way have the ability to consent to say, maybe I want to be murdered, as Will Jones was arguing. And then by the time it got to the closing government, the debate or the arguments that came there were now about who gets to decide when we take a life. So you can see the transition started from what's in the benefit of the woman to what's in the interest of the unborn child that the state still has an obligation to defend or to protect. And then it moved now to who gets to decide when we maybe take a life. So that's one of the debates that I think I would urge people to watch. I know the tournament is starting like 2 days and this is going to be difficult, but just for development of your career as an adjudicator, you need to be able to see that transition. So I would recommend that people watch that debate. And then the second one I think that I enjoyed was the 2009 EUDC final. I think it spoke something about celebrating monuments of the Nazi era. So it also has this interesting transition that I think can teach people how to follow, track the debate, and look at what issues started off at Prime Minister's speech and how the debate ultimately ended up being. And then the last debate, unfortunately, this one was not recorded, from 2014 PUDC final. The motion was this house. I know it had something to do with the Kim Kardashian photo shoot that made rounds where she was almost half naked or naked, depending on how you view it. And the motion centered around the what was it? Sachi Batman, I think. She was a South African who, during I don't know if it was during the slave trade or the colonial era, was sold into slavery. I don't know if it's slavery, but she was displayed in a monument because she had this distinct feature of her butt being extremely larger than what was considered to be normal. So the debate centered around that. And the transition was that when opening government spoke, which was UCT at the time, they spoke about the idea of why individuals have a right to self-determination, and this also should be extended to the idea of them being able to publicly display their body. And then at opening opposition, the team was also another UCT team. These were the defending champions from 2013 in Nigeria. Their argument was more based about how the photo shoot affects people's perception of what a woman is supposed to be about. Then in closing government, I think it was Wits University, they spoke more about the idea of why individual autonomy trumps anyone's right to maybe be protected from nudity, because the general consensus was that it was borderline nudity, or it was just simple nude. And then the team in closing opposition was from the University of Botswana. I was part of that team. We spoke about why symbolism is such a powerful tool in shaping narratives, especially when it comes to women's rights and the rise of the feminist movement. So we were able to monitor that transition, and it allowed us to see what's the most valuable thing that we can maybe engage on. And that's what won us the title in 2014. So as an adjudicator, you need to be in a position to recognize the transition as it happens in a debate. And it starts with how you conduct yourself the debate and also during the debate. So I think that's just the most basic ways in which you can track the debate as an adjudicator. And also, as the debate progresses, you need to either highlight or maybe put a question mark, because that's what I usually do when an idea has been, I don't want to say defeated, but when a more valuable idea compared to that one is introduced in the debate. And then at the bottom of the two ideas, you need to maybe show the engagement that exists between those two competing ideas. Maybe, for example, if the competing ideas is what's the most valuable life to protect? Is it the life of the mother, or is it the life of the unborn child? In the case of this house will ban abortion at all stages of pregnancy. So that also follows through the idea of how you track a debate. So tracking a debate is not an exact science. It's just something that you can learn, and how you do it should be in a way that works for you. So there isn't this rigid structure that we all need to follow, but there are certain elements of the different styles of following a debate that you can use to be able to track the debate well. So the most fundamental thing is, or it hinges on your ability to be able to take down notes, and don't just take down notes on anything that is being said in the debate, but the most valuable thing. Then maybe one last thing that I forgot, because I'm just speaking from the top of my head, is the idea of engagement in a debate. You need to be able to follow engagement, whether through rebuttals and most importantly through points of information, because there is a role that points of information serves in a debate. So you become a better adjudicator, and you become better at following or tracking the debate if you are able to know who asked which point of information and how it was responded. Because during deliberation, sometimes who wins and who places where boils down to some of the most seemingly insignificant things, like points of information, to say, how did this team respond to this point of information? If it was, for example, a point of information that challenged the core of what the case of the team was. And still in reference to the 2009 World's Final, one of the most iconic points of information that I still maybe get chills when I watch and listen to today is the POI from the leader of the opposition, when he was asking the PM to say, because they were comparing abortion to murder, but they were saying there are instances where they would, I don't know, bite the bullet, if I may use that term, to say, no, this is where we can take a life. And the POI was, if you believe that abortion is akin to murder, why should it matter whether a woman was raped or not? So these are the kinds of points of information that you need to be able to track, because they attack the core or the heart of what the opposing team was arguing. And there are some of the things that shape how the discussion goes in terms of who engaged who and how did they respond to the particular point of information that was being asked. So I think those are the basics that you can use if you are trying to follow a debate. And I think it works for both speakers as well as adjudicators, because tracking a debate is not purely something that adjudicators has to do or have to do. Also as a speaker, because I can see the probably speakers on the call, you also need to be able to recognize where the debate shifted and how it moved away from you, because it eliminates the idea that, or this entitlement that speakers have to say, no, but we said that and they didn't say that. But you'd just be saying that because you probably placed fourth in a debate. But if you go back to your notes, you are in a better position to recognize where the debate started, how it went, how you fit in to that specific debate, and would probably not shout at adjudicators, because if there's one thing throughout my career that I've never tolerated is disrespect towards adjudicators, because they play an incredibly valuable role in the debate and in the circuit itself, but somehow we just think because they sit and listen, they're not valuable. So I think that can benefit both speakers and adjudicators. So I think before we move on to third part now of our discussion, I'll stop here for questions. And this time around, I'm not going to continue if there aren't any questions, even if it's just one. So the floor is open for any questions. Yeah, I can see someone is typing in the chat space. That's promising. Okay, the question says, are there any tips to follow the transition of the debate as a judge or as a speaker? So I think one of the ways in which you can do that is to, during your preparation. So often at times, especially I think if you're in closing, because you have enough time to be able to do this, but once you are in opening, you don't have the benefit of seeing how the debate goes. And even if you see how the debate goes, they'll probably shut you down as you try to offer points of information. So I think one way you can do that during your preparation, well, this is for if you're a speaker, just avoid the most obvious arguments, because I think debates somehow once you debate over time, they become repetitive, and you get to know how the debates should be argued and what are the most basic arguments that you can generate. So as a speaker, try to avoid those. Just try to think beyond what the opening team would probably propose in their case. And then if you're in closing, you have the benefit of seeing which arguments are being argued and whether they're still the most valuable arguments that you had thought of during your thing. And then the second thing that you can use as a speaker is to look at the engagement, because I think engagement rebuttals is when you are giving your speech, but engagement is during the debate now, when maybe people are asking points of information. Take note of the kinds of points of information that other teams ask, and whether it can be in reference to your team, because sometimes if people see you as the lesser team in the debate, they would just ask the most basic of points of information. And sometimes they would even throw you a curveball and ask points of information that are just irrelevant, so that they can throw you off the debate. So following points of information is also another tip that you can use to see the transition. If the team in closing, especially maybe if it's the member of opposition, because I think by that time we can say probably everyone in the debate or every team in the debate has been represented. If you see a team in closing asking points of information to the team, maybe in opening government, and they're ignoring the team in closing government, you can start recognizing that it means that the most valuable arguments or the most contentious issues in the debate seem to be there, because no team would want to engage, whether through POIs or rebuttals during their speech, a team that doesn't have the most valuable things to engage in. So I think that's one way you can use to follow the transition of how the debate goes. So that's if you're a speaker. And then if you are a judge, you can also still follow the same metric to see which team engages which team and on what level, and the kinds of points of information that they ask that specific team. That shows you that if everyone's attention is towards opening government, just know that opening government's case is probably going to be the one valuable that ends when the debate, or that stands when the debate ends. And I think one of the ways you can one debate you can watch, there was a period, I think it was from 2010 to 2013 or 2012, where Monash won worlds from opening government. And you could even see during the debate that everyone wanted to engage the team in opening, whether it was Victor at 2010 when the motion was this house will invade Zimbabwe, because the kind of structure that he had given, or the setup and the policy that he had given, was one that endured throughout the debate. So everyone wanted to specifically engage opening government. And also in 2012, when the motion was this house supports nationalism, and Kiran was the one who was in PM speech. So I think the attention that a team gets and the issues that they engaged for in relation to that team, they can give you a pretty good idea as a judge as to where the debate is going and what are the most valuable arguments. If you see everyone ignoring opening government, just know that probably something is wrong. But it's not always the case, because people have a bias against opening government. They would always want to shift the goalpost to eliminate opening government, even though opening government has the most valuable ideas that would endure throughout the debate. So I hope that is sufficient enough for Pahan's question. And then the second question is, what is the structure that a judge should use to enable them to write down the important points for each team? So I think there's a video or a couple of videos that we did when I was DCA for Korea Worlds in 2021, where everyone was giving out what structure they use. What I usually use, because I am old school, I just write on a piece of paper. I divide the piece of paper into four parts for every speaker. And then I know at the top right or the top left of my corner, that's where I write the constructive matter that they have. On the top left, I write the kind of engagement that they give towards other teams. And then on the bottom left, I write the kinds of points of information that they ask. And then the last part is just reserved for any other thing that can come up during their speech. So in that way, if maybe, for example, you did that during the prime minister's speech, when the leader of the opposition comes and they engage the prime minister's speech, you are able to use a different color code to say this issue has been engaged, and then on the bottom left, you write how it was engaged. And then on the last corner of that speech, or that page that you have, you write how it was engaged in terms of maybe the kind of clash that was created around that idea that the PM speech had. So that's just one structure that I used. But there are different ways, as long as it allows you to follow the debate. Just use that structure. So there isn't, like I said, a definite structure that people should follow. But if it's one that allows you to follow your notes seamlessly, then you can just use that one. So that's what I use to follow the transition of a debate, or to just to take down notes. But just go on YouTube and look up the Korea 2021 team, because we did a couple of videos on how you can track the debates, and then you can just hear others, because others, they use their laptops or their computers or Macs to take down the notes. So it just depends on what works for you. And if it's working, then you can just try something else. So I think that was Victor's question, and I also hope that answers that question. And then the next question says, I often find it tough to take notes and decide on how teams are performing simultaneously. So I have to look back at my notes after the round is finished, then again prepare the structure of my RFD. Anyway, how do I fix this? So I think, depending on the level or quality of the debate that you find yourself in, you are probably going to struggle to take down notes, and also at the back of your mind, evaluate how the teams are performing. But I think this is a skill that you can acquire over time if you give yourself enough time. enough practice for the skill, because if you are able to take down notes, and then depending on who's on your panel and who's your chair, usually chairs just give the panelists or the adjudicators maybe 1 minute, 1 minute 30 seconds to say, just wrap up your notes. So that's the time that you can use. I know 1 minute sounds like it's just 60 seconds, but if it's a skill that you develop over time, you are in a position to evaluate those arguments in those split 30 or 60 seconds or whatever time frame your chair gives you. So, and then at the end of the debate also, because I think this is the second part of what I hope I won't butcher your name, and if I do, I'm sorry. Is it Abayev or Abavia? So the second part is you say you look back at your notes after the round is finished and then again prepare the structure. So usually when the debate ends, what I do if I'm here in a debate round, I just give my panelists like 2 to 3 minutes to go over their notes and then decide on their initial rankings. So that's the time that you can also use in addition to that 1 minute. So you see, you probably now have 4 minutes that you can use to decide on your initial rankings and decide on what were the most contentious issues in the debate and how you can navigate evaluating those debates. But over time, and this is something that comes with experience, you are able to just decide if the speech was good or if the speech sucked as soon as I don't want to say prime minister because whatever position the speaker was speaking from, as soon as they decide, you can know at the back of your mind this is probably a 75 speech, which means it's an average speech, or this is an 79 and 82 speech, which is probably an excellent speech. So that comes with experience and over time when you give yourself time as an adjudicator to even understand the speaker score. So that puts you in a better position to be able to navigate that difficulty that comes with trying to take down notes and then decide on how teams are performing simultaneously. So it's also something that comes with practice and attending or adjudicating a couple of debates. So I hope that helps, because I don't know how I can respond to the part where you say, how do you fix it? You can only fix it by giving yourself practice, watching debates, taking down notes, and deciding who wins or who's performing how during that live debate or whatever video that you find on YouTube, because there are thousands of videos on YouTube that you can use to perfect that skill. But it's a valuable question, because I think I also struggled when I transitioned from speaking to adjudication. Because as a speaker, I was strictly just about thinking for 7 minutes in my speech and then the next 7 speeches to see how I can engage. But now, when you move or transition to being an adjudicator, you need to find that balance, and that balance is important. And I hope you do find it. So I hope that answers your question. Then we're gonna move on to the next question to say, do I weigh speeches on the quantity of the points made or the quality of the impact? For instance, in a situation where OG gives very salient points and CG takes those points and make them more impactful a more impactful length, but doesn't have as many points as OG says who takes the win. So I think this is one thing that I always say to people, that in a debate, if you find someone saying I have 7 points, just know that you're gonna get bored. Because for you to become a competent speaker, because before we can answer your question as now as an adjudicator, it depends on who you're adjudicating. So make sure that you always have three or four at most arguments, and there's a distinct or a unique difference between points and arguments. Arguments usually have three parts. There is the claim, which is something that can be disproved to say whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. And then there is the analysis, which is the supporting part to say these are the different layers that we have towards substantiating this claim that we made. And then the last part is probably the evidence, or just supporting statistics. But sometimes you don't always need to have evidence. Evidence can just be examples. So usually we would say you need to have examples as a speaker. So now to respond to the question, you must weigh the quality or the impact that those arguments made, not because someone had like maybe 7 points and then the other team comes and takes those, or maybe 3 of those 7 points and turn them into arguments. Because the danger in having so many points is that you end up rushing through those points and you don't give them time to explain and maybe analyze them, because I know this is a term that adjudicators usually use most of the time to say you didn't analyze your arguments well. So basically, they're just saying that your claim wasn't substantiated enough to a point where we can see why it's true. For example, maybe in the one of the arguments that Victor used was to say the reason why they want to ban abortion is because abortion is akin to murder. That's the claim. You need to show us the link between murder, someone intentionally maybe taking a gun and knife, then claiming another life, need to show us how that maybe relates or is similar to a woman making the decision to terminate the life of something that is, or not a life, but terminating this combination of cells. Because I think that was the response that Will Jones gave to Victor. So you see, you build on that claim by asking yourself why. Why do I think abortion is akin to murder? Because it ends a potential life that, if left unharmed, could develop into a fully functional human being. Why is that important, or why does that fit into the debate? So you need to look at the quality or the impact that that has in the debate itself, as opposed to saying they had 7 arguments. They told us that abortion is akin to murder, that abortion maybe denies or women's right to choose, or whatever points that they're having. So you look at the quality and the kind of impact that the arguments have in the general or the broader sense of the debate itself. That way it becomes more easier for you to say we valued what opening government was saying because these are the arguments that they said, and this is probably the value or the essence of those arguments. So I think to respond to your question, to say who wins, it just has to be who has the most quality or impact in the debate. It's not a question of who has the most arguments or the most points. most points to argue in a debate. Because sometimes the points or the arguments, if you have 5, 6, you don't have enough time. 7 minutes is just a brief moment to be able to analyze those arguments or points. So I hope Gia have been able to fairly answer your question. Then I think that was probably the last question that we had. So we're gonna move on to the second part, which is now to identify the right case. And I think here we're gonna Gia has asked in our discussion to say how do we weigh the quality? Because ultimately you need to decide who wins and who loses. And like I said, debaters or speakers have this entitlement to say, because I spoke for 7 minutes and we spoke for a combined 14 minutes with my partner, we have a fair chance of winning. Sometimes you don't just have a fair chance because you simply spoke. So we're going to look at how to identify themes and clashes and engagement as an adjudicator. So the first thing that you need to look at as an adjudicator is, what are the broad ideas that every team is arguing towards? And I think this comes from the idea that during their preparation, the speakers or the teams would say, our case is largely going to be focused on maybe 3 key ideas or themes or areas. So that's where you can piggyback on as an adjudicator to say, what are the most contentious issues, or even before that, just basically what is being discussed. Sometimes motions are about the right to life, whether we take it or whether we should give it. So that is basically what themes are centered around. Like, do women, or should women, because they do, should women have a right to maybe end or terminate pregnancy? If so, for what reasons? Times, if it's an international relations motion, it can be about a country's right to defend itself, like we are seeing right now in the Middle East. There's back and forth argument to or debate to say, does Israel have a right to defend itself against the terror that Hamas has perpetrated on them on October 7th? And some people are saying, even though Israel has a right to defend itself like any other nation should have, are they doing it in the most just way? And I think that question or that theme of just, we can see it unfold even in everyday life when the Republic of South Africa took the government of Israel to the International Court of Justice to say what Israel is doing is genocide or is akin to genocide, depending on how you see it as an individual. So those are the things that you can use as an adjudicator to say, where do we see the clash or the engagement? Like, one team is saying this, one team is saying that. How do they relate? So on this issue of Israel and Palestine, it's a question of who has a right to defend themselves and how should they conduct themselves while defending that right. That can be a theme in a given debate. I don't know what the motion would be, but it can be a theme. It can be a clash also to say there is a direct engagement. This is to say that one team cannot say something and then they don't get a response to that. And the response usually is underlined by either a principle or a philosophy or maybe a right to say Palestinians also have the right to live in a safe and secure Gaza or in the West Bank or wherever. So this to say that you need to look at where there is a convergence of ideas when teams or speakers are arguing. That is how you follow the debate. You can look at the clashes. And then sometimes there are themes. Themes is just question form. And if you are in a debate where the level of the debate is maybe fairly average, high, or even exceptional, you'd see the engagement or the themes being highlighted in the structure speech that the individuals or individual speakers are giving. Because sometimes when the speech starts, you'd hear someone say, they would give their introduction, they would do whatever, and then they say, I'm going to have three key ideas or three key questions that we think that we believe, because language also matters in terms of persuasion, that we believe if we answer, we're going to win this debate. So that's where you can piggyback on as an adjudicator to say, okay, no, wait, this probably means it's the theme that this side of the bench is going to be arguing for. And then when maybe the opposition comes, they also have their set of questions or set of ideas that they're going to be defending. But because they have to respond to what the opening government had said, usually there has to be a clash. It is very rare these days, even in one of the most poor debates that you can ever imagine. It's not rare, or rather, it's rare to find an instance where there is no clash or there aren't any themes that you can see that this one stands on the left, this one stands on the right. So that's how you can evaluate those themes. But it depends on what debate you are on and how the debate is being argued by the individual teams. Then the last part now to evaluate either the themes or the clashes is to look at the engagement. So a debate, in essence, when you're adjudicating, you need to tell us who wins, but how do you reconcile the two teams and say this is the one who won? You look at how the teams engage each other. This is why, even I think in the old way of scoring, there used to be this part that maybe I think it was in high school when I still debated in high school. There used to be this part where they would say engagement, and then it probably takes like 35 points out of 100. So you can recognize that debate has to come down to an element of engagement so that we can see the competing ideas. Whether someone is defending Israel's right to defend themselves, or whether someone is saying Israel is wrong in the way they're conducting the war. Or maybe in the case of Russia and Ukraine, or maybe if the motion is like maybe philosophical motion and the motion says this house prefers a world without envy or jealous. So you can see that there has to be some form of engagement. And how you evaluate how the teams performed is based in large part to the engagement and how they respond to other teams in the debate. So in that final, that seems to be one of my favorite debates that I've watched over the years. Victor didn't respond adequately to the point of information that he was. Why should it matter whether a woman was raped or not? His response was just to say that there are certain extenuating circumstances that we can consider to mitigate the harm that has been accrued or perpetrated on a woman. This is why they were saying they would ban abortion at all stages of pregnancy, but they would allow in instances where a woman has been violently raped or when pregnancy threatens the life of the mother. So you can see the engagement started off through a simple POI in the PM speech, but the adjudicators were able to recognize that the level of response that POI or that engagement received didn't outweigh the significance of the POI and ultimately the case that opening opposition ran to say they don't care whether someone has been raped or whatever situation they had to go through. Everyone should have access to abortion because if we are to believe that abortion is akin to murder, then it shouldn't matter what the condition is. So that engagement was so important in shaping the transition of the debate and locking it down to what opening opposition was saying because they are the ones who ultimately won from opening opposition. So engagement now you see, you ask, looking at these two arguments or these two cases, which one do I value the most? And what is my valuation of value in this case based on to say they were able to respond to this other equally important right that exists and show us why maybe that right, as important as they might want to make us believe it is, it's not as important as maybe the right to life. Because ultimately the debate hinged on the idea that the opposition dismissed the idea that women should have access to abortion because it's premised on the idea that the opening government was saying it's just an inconvenience to women. So you see, if someone says the reason why was it inconveniences women, maybe gives make women gain weight. This is a combination of cells, even at that stage, that if left uninterrupted, has the potential to grow into a fully functional human being, which qualifies it's an issue of rights. If someone mentions the issue of or the right, I know which right is the most important right that I can consider. But ultimately it depends on how. So that's the level of engagement that you need to look at. Why do I value this argument? Did it receive in terms of POIs and how were they responded to? So that is one element that can allow you to weigh the impact of points or arguments that are being given and ultimately decide on who wins and who loses. So that is just basically it with the basics of trying to identify the right cases and the level of engagement that a team can receive in a debate. And this is incredibly important now when it goes to the last part of our discussion that we're going to be looking at, which is now how to conduct oral adjudication. So I'll stop here, have any, which I hope they do. Just type the questions in the chat space. Yeah, I can see Fahan is the one who's typing in the chat space and saying no, saying it's not useful. That is still constructive. Everything I'm saying, if maybe you think there's something that we can maybe discuss, you're still more than welcome to. Okay, so the question from Farhan says, "Humble thing of judging." So please try to answer that. So I think maybe a score, and because this is one point, so that they can see if Boemo is giving a speech, is it a 65 speech, is it a 70 speech? So you need to go back and revise the speaker score, because I think it has been updated over time, and I think we did update it during the Korea WUDC, make it more understandable, because usually it was just some of the think or thought should be in a certain bracket, and the correlating or corresponding score that you can give to say, was it worth listening to? What were the issues, and how were these issues explained, and some of those things. One moment, hi, can I call you back? Senzigile mo training. Yeah, sorry about that. So the speaker score, it explains what speech can fit in which bracket, and how you can decides who wins and who loses. So sometimes what I do is not to look at speeches in isolation, but to look at the team as a collective. And this isn't to say you can't award one speaker higher marks compared to their partner, because it happens in terms of the team dynamics. So how you do that is during your deliberation, you need to decide on which team wins as a collective. Why do you think that team won? Where, in which category did the speeches they gave fall in? So I think that's how you can give the speaker scores. And usually just have a rough category that you fit a speech in, but this will depend on whether you've seen the speakers to give yourself time to have a look at. So when someone is speaking, if you've maybe internalized speaker score, you can see, but Boemo's speech is probably in the average range. This is to say it's either from 73 to 75. And there are certain features that you need to be looking at to say the speech fits there. Sometimes an average explained there weren't sufficient examples, or if examples were given, these are the kinds of examples that didn't meet the kind of argument or claim that was being the speech. And the second part, Fahan says, he personally feels like, or they personally feel like, it's the most questionable thing of judging. Because sometimes it just depends on what you like as an adjudicator, which is why we need to say, I like this speech, not because it's convincing, but simply because maybe of how someone spoke. And these are some of the things that we've been fighting over time, to say how someone speaks shouldn't have any impact or reflect on the kind of score they get. We should evaluate people purely based on the content of their speech. Fahan. And this goes out to everyone who's an adjudicator. Even a speaker, you need to know what kind of speech you are giving and which range, so that you don't lash out when you get 70s. So if you've been able to see the speaker scores and see or speaker with the kind of marks you get, and this allows you to maybe develop to say, because I was in a category where my arguments were under analyzed, how do I better analyze my arguments? You see, that's room for improvement even for you as every argument that has been rebutted. How do you identify clashes in a round? So clash is just to say, like I said, maybe one is the right to self-defense and then one is the right to life. That's a clash. Sometimes speakers don't respond to every argument, but it doesn't mean the argument doesn't stand because it hasn't been responded to. And sometimes been the ones that win the debate. So clashes really is just to say, where do these arguments maybe collide? If it's maybe on idea of principle, right to life and right to self-defense, maybe whatever idea can clash in a debate. So I think that's as best. So classes are just that point where you can see that there's a direct maybe engagement between two competing ideas. But it's just line around principle and philosophy. So I think that's as best as I can respond to the question. Then understand the way in can do you rank by speaker score, and what happens if the team spoke well? So, Emmanuel, the team that wins has to be the team that has the most system that is used these days. Sophisticated is not like the ones we used back in my days when we started when we using TabyCAD. So it already knows that the team that places first has to have the highest score. So if either intentionally or by mistake you input to say the team or the team that you say won has an average of 120, that team is the one that's going to be reflected as the winner. So it means if you genuinely believe one team won, you need to revise scores, because that's the only way the tab or the tab system would allow you to submit the ballot. Otherwise, where you say you still don't fully understand the weighing. So the weighing is just who convinces you or who persuades you. Because that's why in a panel, we can have a panel of maybe three, because usually panels are a panel of 3, 5, 7. We can have people have why maybe you are sticking with opening government when everyone else is saying decisions in a debate round. It's just to show that I value different debates. So it doesn't mean because you are either in the minority, you are wrong. No. Sometimes, yes, you can start off being in the minority and then you get persuaded when you hear or evaluating the case that the team that they won had argued. That's how you can see the weighing come into play. But the way you weight is a personal thing. Just to say, I think this was more valuable coming from this team, like the one about the right to life. Sometimes some people don't value the right to life, so they will probably think it is an adjudicator. So which team wins needs to be the team that has the hand to be faced with this situation where there's a team, the dynamics aren't as good. There's this one exceptional speaker, and then the other one doesn't complement the other speaker. And then the other thing, there was much value coming from the second speech, whichever speech, in terms of the speaker scores, even for two people in one team. But you'd be in a that's competent enough, which I do believe. I believe all adjudicators are competent. I never want to question during deliberation to see the way in which other people value which ideas they value in the debate. So that's how the more material that you can read on, and then you can fully cause for Wells and PUDC. They do training material or training resources that they use to set the standard for the specific tone, how you can fully understand how a debate is weighed. So I hope, Emmanuel, that answers your question. Then the last question that we have is what could be the better and possible oral adjudication? Every team's comparative and OA will not become a vacuum for any. I think this question discussion so that we don't take too much time about oral adjudication. So I would go into when I go into the last adjudication. Just basically means the debate has ended. Adjudicators remain behind in a room or in a breakout room, whether if it's on Discord or wherever. Team that doesn't win that debate, I don't like saying losers because everyone is a winner. One of the most important things you need to know going into oral adjudication, the panel plays. So there's a reason why we have a chair and then we have adjudication court to say this is someone who can trust to make important. I hope by now everyone is aware of the different roles that every member of the panel occupies. But for the benefit of those who don't, we have two roles. The first one is the chair, then the second one is the panelist or wing. So the term wing usually is used by Europeans and Americans, but the term panelist is used by us Africans. So those are the two roles that we have on a panel. So the chair is responsible for conducting the debate. They're the ones who calls the house to order once time has elapsed, and they're the ones who call people to stage. They're the ones who manage just the general over. We have panelists. Panelists are tasked with complementing, and usually one of their most important roles is to take the deliberation. So now we're going to go back to the chair because the chair occupies a unique also tasked with. If this usually happens if it's an even member panel. If let's say there are 4 people in that panel, the chair has the deciding vote as to who places where if there's a contention amongst maybe 2 teams. So the chair also engage in deliberations. You need to do to ensure that everyone is not being heard, because you'll be in a panel where you have people who are very expressive and they want to be the star of the show. if I may use that term, to be the ones whose ideas have been listened to. And then there are those who debate. So it's your responsibility as a chair to ensure that you give them time. In the clash between opening comment and opening opposition, what do you think were the most maybe valuable things, Boemo, to ensure that everyone participates, get into feedback or deliberation, ultimately feedback? After 15 minutes or whatever time frame you've been, they won. So that is basically what oral adjudication is. Usually 15 minutes is what's being evaluated as a check. If Boemo and Foster and maybe 5 minutes to deliberate and see you are evaluated to say why did they take or to take more than 15 minutes, you need to notify people knocking at your door to say no, time's up, you need to give us the ballot. You can just tell them we need an additional maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. That's as much as you can be given. So time management is very important, which is why as soon as the preparation time elapses, you need to be by the debate venue to call everyone inside, because this gives direction to how the debate is going to pan out at the end of the day. So now the most important thing that we're going to be looking at is deliberation. And I think here we can now look at the question that Bahim asked, to say how could one better give oral adjudication. So once the deliberation has ended, you've decided on which team places where and who gets how many speaker scores. The chair has to stand up and give the oral adjudication. So one way in which you can start off your oral adjudication, and this is what I've used over the years, is to start off by just giving the rankings, honestly, because people have been debating for close to an hour. You probably take it another 20 minutes to deliberate. So people are anxious to know where they placed. So just start off with the rankings, and you need to be in command when you give oral adjudication. In as much as we want speakers to be clear, to be audible, to be eloquent, we also need to possess that skill as adjudicators, because it also adds on to how people evaluate your oral adjudication, because they also are going to give feedback on you, they're going to mark you. So that also plays on how you perform in a tournament. You need to be assertive in your feedback. If you are giving your feedback and you're just mumbling and people can't hear you, me knowing debaters, they are gonna start banging the table. So you want to be as audible as possible, and you want to appear to be in control. So start off by giving the rankings, and you need to be dead right about the rankings to avoid confusion. If the rankings that you initially or that you ultimately decided on as a panel is opening government first, closing opposition second, closing government third, opening opposition fourth, and you start making a mistake to say closing opposition placed first when in actual fact they placed second, it casts doubt on your ability as an adjudicator, and also doubt on the decision that was reached as the panel, because it might leave room for suspicion that no, maybe they were not sure. So you need to be sure of the rankings. You can just say coming in first position, we have opening government, second, we have closing opposition, third, we have closing government, and then fourth, we have opening opposition. And if you want to give yourself time, you can just also repeat them for the benefit of the room. Because sometimes people don't hear the rankings. If maybe, for example, they thought they were going to place first and then they placed third, by the time you get to closing government to say they placed third, there's already confusion in their mind to say, why did we place third when we placed second? So it's important to be as clear and audible and as precise as possible in giving the rankings. And then now the oral adjudication, because from there on you need to justify the rankings. What you can do is to start off by giving an overview of the debate, to say, as the panel, we thought this was like an average debate. If you give that analysis, people already know that we were probably in the 75, 77 bracket. So it eliminates a lot of doubt in their minds as to what the quality of the debate was. Because debaters have this superpower of thinking they were the best, even though they just gave average speeches. So you can just give an overview. By the overview, I mean that you can just tell them this was an average debate, this was an above average debate, and then just mention the most contentious issues that ultimately decided the debate. To say there were three key questions that we looked at in terms of deciding on the verdict. And these questions were, so that allows you and your panel, you need to have established this question. Sometimes the questions can piggyback on the whip speeches, because the whip speeches just summarize the debate to say what are the main issues in the debate. So we can just piggyback on those so that they don't say you formulated your own debate. So if you are able to reference the questions that were being used by the whip, and if you are fortunate enough and the whip is a good or an excellent whip, it becomes easy for you to give feedback. So you can give the overview and the key clashes in the debate. And then from there on, also you needed to have a piece of paper to say how did each team fit in this question or in this clash in the debate, so that you can reference that when you give your oral adjudication. That also helps you in now weighing the debate. I think here this is where we can now move on to how to best to give a better or a pattern that covers every team's comparative. So if you have a piece of paper, whatever method you are using, where you highlight the three questions, if it's three questions that maybe the debate ultimately boiled down to, or four questions, then you can have like those four boxes that I spoke of earlier. At the top left, you have opening government, top right, you have opening opposition, bottom left, closing government, bottom right, you have closing opposition. Because every team recognizes what's the most important question to address in a given debate. So they might have something to speak on about the right to life. Even if the right to life was won in opening, they might still want to add something to it. So you need to recognize and acknowledge that question in the debate. So you can have a piece of paper that a stage where, or at the stage where it's still a combination of cells. They were speaking more about maybe the right to life after maybe it has started formulating human-like features. And we think by that time, probably it was already too late. The embryo might have been aborted. So we think the most valuable one is where opening opposition speaks about where it starts. That even as much as maybe it's still just a combination of cells after the egg and the sperm have fused, we still value that life. So you see, if you are able to have everyone's contribution on the question of the rights to life, you are able to evaluate and say what was the most valuable. Why was it the most valuable? Because it brought more, maybe more clarity to the debate. It had more examples that was being used. So that way, it becomes easier for you to have a better pattern in which you can have an oral adjudication that covers every team's comparative, and you don't leave any team behind. Because in as much as a team can place fourth or last, they still contributed something, and you need to acknowledge that contribution. Even though it might not be the most valuable contribution, you still need to acknowledge it. So I think that's how we can answer the first part of Fahim's question, to say what pattern can you have. So you can have three questions or however many questions you have, and then just start by tackling one question at a time. Usually, oral adjudication, you are given 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the standard that the adjudication call for that specific tournament has. You are in a position to maybe see how you can break down that time to fit the oral adjudication that you have. And secondly, the question on how can you utilize panelists in a room, assuming you are the chair. So that's why I said you need to create an environment where everyone on your panel or your team feels like they are contributing. So, because sometimes we can hear certain arguments differently, but they are still valuable. So, during deliberation, you can utilize the panelists by ensuring they contribute to the discussion. Because as a team, you are here to maybe reach a verdict, and you need to be in a position to say, how did you see that argument? how was that argument responded? And because people speak fast and you are trying to take notes at the same time, you might miss out on some of the most valuable thing that a team or a speaker said. This is where you need to rely on your panelists. And this isn't just on the chair themselves, even panelists, because you're also being evaluated to see whether you can break or not. You need to make yourself heard, because that's the only way in which you can contribute meaningfully to the discussion. I think that's how we can best answer the second part on how do you utilize panelists in a room. Assuming I'm a chair, as most of the time these panel discussions tend to be messy situations and delays time. So also as a chair, if you want to maybe fall within the stipulated time for deliberation, if it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes, make sure that you give people a time frame to say you have 60 seconds to maybe contribute. You have 30 seconds, because sometimes people want to talk for like 5 minutes trying to justify one argument, and you only have 15 minutes, and you have four teams that probably had four arguments each, and that's like 16 arguments that you need to go through. So you cannot have one person speaking continuously for more than 1 minute 30 seconds. That's the standard that I set myself. If I'm in a panel, I give everyone at most 1 minute 30 seconds. If I'm being generous, 2 minutes to contribute. And sometimes you shouldn't maybe limit them to contributing to one argument, because sometimes certain arguments feed into each other. So even if the panelist speaks about one argument and then they link it with another argument, that's also a bonus, because you are able to maybe deliberate on two arguments at the same time. So you need to be in control as the chair. You need to tell people that no, you can't speak for 3, 4, 5 minutes continuously. You're going to run out of time. So it goes back to the idea of saying you need to be in charge. I'm not saying be a dictator or be an authoritarian. No, it just needs to be reasonable and in a respectful manner that doesn't make the panelists feel like you are shutting them down. So you can just make them realize the essence of time. So I hope that answers Fahim's question that I said I was gonna come back to my thing. So the last thing that we can look at, and then I'll go on to the second question that I see already popping up. So during oral adjudication, like I said, every team needs to feel like they contributed. Sometimes as adjudicators, we get carried away with the teams that won, because it's easy to justify why someone won as opposed to justifying why someone placed third and fourth. So we spend the bulk of our time explaining why the team that ranked in the top half won. So usually how I do it is I start off by from the bottom up to say why the teams that placed third and fourth placed in those positions. Because it's easier to convince someone who won or to persuade someone who won as opposed to someone who placed fourth and last. Those are the people that need to really understand where they went wrong, how other teams placed better than them or argued better than them. So usually I just start from the bottom up to say, this is why opening government may place last if they placed last in the debate. And then you don't just say why they placed last, because here you can just maybe look at the overall strategy that they used, that they didn't maybe contribute any new or positive material that hasn't been discussed if they're extending, if it's a team that's extending. And then secondly, you need to contrast or compare that to other teams in the debate. Don't just stop at saying this is what was wrong with your case. Show them what other teams did better compared to them. If maybe it's just an issue of structure, to say they weren't the most strategic team, the issues that they chose to focus on weren't the most important issues in the debate. Compare that with the most important issues in the debate and why more value can be accrued from the other case coming from the other team. I think that's just the last most crucial part that you need to do as an adjudicator. So I'm gonna go two, three more questions. So in situations where an argument makes a bit of sense, but I intuitively believe them to be unworkable for certain reasons, how do I weigh that argument based on my intuition, or must I wait for them to be rebutted? So, like I said, generally we say adjudicators are just average intelligence voters. We don't factor ourselves in the debate. Until something is rebutted, you credit it, depending on how convincing it is. Because you're saying if it makes a bit of sense, if you think it makes a bit of sense, fair enough, we can credit it until something that makes a lot or a whole lot more sense comes, that argument stands. And secondly, until it's rebutted, you need to consider it, not credit it, consider it in the debate until something that's more valuable comes through. So the reason why we don't want us to use our intuition is because we are factoring ourselves now in the debate. We are thinking on behalf of other teams or other speakers in the debate. So for us, we just need to sit back, listen to the arguments, then compare them to other arguments. So that's why adjudicators are cautioned against the use of specialized knowledge. You can't discredit something because it's something that you know, unless if it's an outright lie. If someone tells us that the president of the United States of America is Boemo, unless if you've been living under a rock, that's something that you can't credit as an adjudicator because it's an outright lie. And also you need to evaluate how the lie fits into the debate, because sometimes people just use names interchangeably, but the bulk or the analysis still stands. Maybe you just got the name wrong, but what follows that claim is something that's still valuable and contributes to the debate. So that's how you can evaluate people getting away with lies or you catching people who want to get away with lies. So it's just something that comes over time. You need to see this thing as an adjudicator happen in live debates, which is why I recommend that people go through the internet and watch debates, because you can learn a lot. So I think that's as best as I can answer that question from Ejia. So I see people are dropping off, which means we are probably running out of time now. So we'll just have room for one last question if anyone has any question. But if I don't see anyone typing on the chat, so I'm just going to say my goodbyes. I want to thank everyone for the time that they spent here listening to me mumble about some of the things I learned over time. And I hope they were valuable. And it was just an overview. You need to invest in your craft, either as a speaker or as an adjudicator, so that you can become better over time. So I hope that helps. And some of the channels that have been referenced, please do look them up on YouTube so that you can follow them at length. And I know people are preparing for a tournament, and I hope this helps. And I hope that you my literally my first. Then I attended other tournaments in between, and then my second PUDC in I won't say the year, and then you're gonna see how old I am. I was able my second PUDC because I wasn't just focusing on winning, I was focusing on becoming a better version of myself as a speaker after